She was simply doing her job when the millionaire's wife suddenly grabbed her uniform and tore it right in front of everyone. But no one in the house was prepared for how the millionaire reacted. Stay with me, because this story will shock you. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into the story. The morning began like any other at the Harrison estate. 26-year-old Maya Thompson moved quietly through the marble hallways. Her steps made barely a sound on the polished floors. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed to shine even in her simple gray uniform. Maya had been working as a maid for the Harrisons for 8 months, and she had learned to navigate the complex world of wealth with careful grace. The estate itself was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to reach the heavens. Persian rugs adorned floors that gleamed like mirrors. Every piece of furniture whispered stories of old money and refined taste. But beneath all that beauty simmered tensions, like water on the verge of boiling. Maya came from a humble background, raised by her grandmother in a small apartment across town. She worked 2 jobs while attending evening classes in business. When the position at the Harrison estate opened, she saw it as more than just a job. It was a stepping stone toward the future she dreamed of building. She approached every task with quiet determination, whether it was arranging flowers in the grand foyer or preparing for afternoon tea. The Harrison family consisted of 3 members, each carrying their own weight in the family dynamic. Richard Harrison, the 42-year-old patriarch, had built his fortune through smart investments and careful business decisions. He possessed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing one's worth without needing to prove it. His dark eyes carried wisdom, but also a loneliness that money could never quite fill. Then there was his wife, Victoria Harrison. Blonde, beautiful, and sharp as a blade. She had married for wealth and wore it like armor. Coming from old money society herself, Victoria understood the unspoken rules of their world better than anyone. She knew which charity galas to attend, which designer to wear, and exactly how to maintain the family's flawless reputation. But Victoria also understood something else. She could sense when someone threatened the careful order she had spent years constructing. The third member of the family was 12-year-old Emma Harrison, Richard's daughter from his first marriage. Emma was a bright child with curious eyes and a heart that had not yet learned to build walls. She treated Maya with genuine kindness that made the work feel less like duty and more like calling. From the start, Maya had noticed how Richard's eyes lingered when she served morning coffee or organized documents in his study. It was never inappropriate, but something in his gaze made her heart race in ways she tried to ignore. He spoke to her differently than he did to the rest of the staff. Where others received polite nods and brief instructions, Maya found herself drawn into conversations about books, current events, even her opinions on the artwork in the house. These moments troubled Maya more than she wanted to admit. She had seen enough of the world to know that admiration across social classes rarely ended well for the one with less power. So she kept her responses polite but distant, always mindful of the invisible lines that separated their worlds. Victoria Harrison was not blind to these exchanges. She watched every interaction with the sharp focus of a hawk circling its prey. Her entire identity was built around being the perfect wife to a successful man. And she would not allow anyone to threaten that position, especially a maid who seemed to forget her place. The troubles began small, as such things often do. Victoria started finding faults in Maya's work in ways that felt personal rather than professional. The flowers weren't arranged quite right. The silver wasn't polished enough. Maya's uniform looked wrinkled, even when it had been freshly ironed. Every criticism came with a smile that never reached Victoria's eyes, spoken in a tone sweet but laced with venom. Maya endured these moments with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else. She nodded politely, apologized even when it wasn't required, and simply worked harder. But inside, she felt the weight of constant scrutiny and judgment for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual work. The other staff began to notice the tension as well. Mrs. Chen, the elderly cook who had worked for the family for 15 years, would shake her head sadly when Victoria's sharp voice carried from the dining room. Thomas, the gardener, started offering Maya encouraging smiles whenever their paths crossed. Even young Emma seemed to sense something was wrong, though she couldn't fully understand what. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late September. The Harrisons were hosting a dinner party for some of Richard's business partners and their wives. This was the kind of event Victoria lived for, a chance to showcase their home, their status, and her skills as the perfect hostess. The dining room was transformed into something worthy of a magazine spread. Candles flickered on the long mahogany table, casting warm light over crystal glasses and fine china. Maya had spent hours helping prepare for the evening. She polished every piece of silver until it shone, arranged fresh orchids in tall vases, and folded linen napkins into perfect squares. Her uniform was spotless, her hair neatly pinned back. She moved through the evening's service with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark. The guests were impressive, the kind of people whose names appeared in business journals and society pages. Conversations flowed around stock portfolios, charitable foundations, and upcoming holidays in places Maya had only seen in travel magazines. She served each course with meticulous attention, ensuring water glasses remained full and plates were cleared at just the right moments. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. As Maya reached for the last dessert plate, completely unaware of what was about to unfold, the months of tension were about to explode in a way that would make the entire family question everything they thought they knew about power, dignity, and what it truly meant to stand up for what was right. The silence that followed would become the kind that changes everything forever. Victoria Harrison rose from her chair with the smooth grace of someone who had spent years perfecting every movement for maximum impact. Her champagne-colored silk gown caught the candlelight as she moved, casting an almost ethereal glow around her figure. But there was nothing heavenly about the expression on her face. Maya. Victoria's voice cut through the dining room with crystal clarity. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every fork froze halfway to waiting lips. The sudden shift in atmosphere was so complete that even the candle flames seemed to flicker in response. Maya looked up from the plate she held. Her dark eyes widened in confusion. She had done nothing wrong, said nothing inappropriate, but something in Victoria's tone made her stomach tighten with dread. "Come here, please," Victoria continued. The word please was wielded like a weapon wrapped in silk. Maya set the plate down with trembling hands and stepped forward. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room following her. The business partners and their wives sat utterly still, sensing drama but not yet understanding its nature. This was the kind of moment that would be whispered about in country clubs for months. Richard Harrison sat at the head of the table. His jaw tightened as he watched his wife with growing unease. He knew that look in her eyes, had seen it before when she felt threatened or challenged. But never had he seen it directed at someone so defenseless. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced to the room, her voice carrying the practiced projection of someone used to commanding attention. "I believe we are witnessing something quite remarkable tonight. Our help seems to have completely forgotten her place." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the room. She wanted to ask what she had done wrong, wanted to defend herself, but years of working in houses like this had taught her that sometimes silence was the only shield available. "Victoria," Richard's voice carried a warning tone that made several guests glance nervously between husband and wife. Perhaps this conversation should wait until after dinner. But Victoria was beyond reason. Months of watching her husband's eyes follow Maya around their home had led to this moment. Every polite conversation he shared with the young woman, every smile he offered, every time he treated her as a human being rather than invisible staff, had fueled Victoria's growing resentment. "No, dear," Victoria replied sweetly, never taking her eyes off Maya. "I think our guests deserve to see exactly what kind of staff we've been sheltering in our home. The kind who thinks she can dress up and pretend to be something she is not." Maya's uniform was the same simple gray dress she wore every day, pressed, clean, and entirely appropriate. But under Victoria's scathing gaze, she felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with clothing. Mrs. Patterson, the wife of one of Richard's business partners, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had employed countless maids over the years and had never seen anyone treated with such public cruelty. The young woman standing before them carried herself with more dignity than many society ladies. Mrs. Patterson knew. "Victoria, please," Richard tried again, his voice more strained now. He could see the pain blooming in Maya's eyes, feel the awkward tension radiating from their guests. This dinner was supposed to solidify important business relationships, not destroy them with unnecessary drama. But Victoria Harrison had spent too many sleepless nights imagining threats to her carefully constructed world. She had married Richard not just for love, but for security, for status, for the life his money could provide. The thought of losing any of that to a young woman with kind eyes and genuine warmth had driven her to the point of irrationality. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Victoria asked Maya, circling her like a predator. "I see someone who has forgotten that this is not your house. These are not your people. This is not your world." Maya's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "I know my place, Mrs. Harrison. I have never forgotten it." "Really?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Then why do you walk through my halls as if you belong here? Why do you speak to my husband as if you are his equal? Why do you look at my life as if you could ever be part of it?" The questions struck Maya like physical blows. She had been so careful, so professional, so respectful of every boundary. Yet somehow, her very existence had become a threat in Victoria's mind. At that moment, young Emma Harrison appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Her 12-year-old eyes took in the scene with growing alarm. Only yesterday, Maya had helped her with homework, patiently listening as Emma practiced her piano pieces. Now the woman who had shown her such kindness stood in the middle of the dining room, looking as though she might break down in tears. "Mama." Emma's voice was small and confused. "What's happening?" "Go to your room, Emma," Richard ordered, his voice firmer than his daughter had ever heard. With deliberate slowness, Victoria reached out and grabbed the collar of Maya's uniform. "Allow me to remind you," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room, "exactly who you are in this house." The fabric was sturdy cotton, designed to withstand the daily wear of honest work. But under Victoria's manicured fingers, it began to tear with a sound that seemed to echo off the dining room walls like thunder. The ripping went on for what felt like an eternity, exposing Maya's shoulder and the simple white undershirt beneath. Maya gasped and stumbled back, clutching the torn edges of her uniform to her chest. Tears of humiliation welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. The dining room fell into utter silence, broken only by Maya's ragged breathing. Several of the women at the table looked away in shame, while the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had crossed every line of decency and civility. Emma let out a small cry from the doorway. Her young mind struggled to process what she had just seen. The Maya she knew was kind and gentle, someone who never deserved such cruelty. And then Richard Harrison stood. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Richard rose slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with deliberate precision. Every eye in the room turned to him, waiting to see how the master of the house would respond to his wife's shocking spectacle. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Richard said nothing. His dark eyes moved from his wife's flushed face to Maya's torn uniform, then to the faces of their dinner guests, frozen in uncomfortable silence. The weight of his gaze seemed to press down on the entire room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of a man who had built empires with his words. "Victoria." The single word hung in the air like a verdict. The triumphant expression on Victoria's face faltered. She had expected support, or at least silent acceptance. Instead, she saw something in her husband's eyes that made her stomach turn cold. "What you just did," Richard continued, his voice growing firmer with each word, "is unforgivable." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her pearl necklace. Mr. Westbrook nearly choked on his wine. No one had expected this turn of events. Victoria's face paled beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Richard, you don't understand." She was. "No." Richard's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "It's you who doesn't understand. Maya Thompson is not just an employee in this house. She is a human being who deserves respect and dignity, something you have utterly failed to provide." Maya stood frozen, clutching her torn uniform. Tears now streamed freely down her cheeks. She had never expected anyone to stand up for her, least of all the man whose wife had just humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. Richard walked around the table with measured steps until he stood directly before Maya. Without hesitation, he removed his own dinner jacket, an impeccably tailored garment that likely cost more than Maya made in 3 months. With gentle hands, he draped it over her shoulders, shielding her from the staring eyes. "I am deeply sorry," he said to her in a voice low enough for only her to hear. "No one should ever be treated the way you just were, least of all in my home." Emma stepped cautiously into the room now, her young face streaked with tears. She had never seen adults behave this way, never witnessed such cruelty followed by such kindness. The confusion on her face was heartbreaking. Richard turned to face the room. His protective stance before Maya was unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize for this unfortunate disruption to our evening. My wife has clearly forgotten herself tonight." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. To be publicly rebuked by her husband in front of their guests was worse than any private argument they might have had. Her carefully crafted image of the perfect society wife was crumbling before her eyes. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation. "How dare you shame me in front of our guests over some common maid?" Richard's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "The only person shamed here tonight is Maya. And the one responsible for that humiliation was you." Mr. Westbrook cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should be leaving," he suggested, already reaching for his wife's hand. The other guests began murmuring agreement, eager to escape the toxic atmosphere that had consumed what was meant to be an elegant dinner party. But Richard was not finished. He had watched his wife's subtle cruelties toward Maya for months, choosing to ignore them in the name of keeping peace. Tonight had shown him the cost of that silence. "Before anyone leaves," Richard announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I want you all to know something about the woman whose dignity was just insulted before you." Maya's eyes widened in alarm. She didn't want more attention, didn't want to become the center of even greater drama. But Richard's hand on her shoulder was gentle yet firm, keeping her in place. Maya Thompson graduated college with honors, working 2 jobs to support herself and her ailing grandmother, Richard continued. She speaks 3 languages fluently and has been accepted into the State University's business program for next fall. She has shown more grace, intelligence, and genuine class in 8 months than some people manage in an entire lifetime. The words struck the room like lightning. Several guests looked ashamed of their earlier silence. Mrs. Patterson slowly nodded, recognition and respect shining in her eyes. Victoria's face turned from pale to dark red. "You defend her over your own family," she hissed. "Over your own wife." "I defend what is right," Richard replied firmly. "Something that should never require choosing between family and conscience." Young Emma finally found her voice. "Maya helps me with my homework," she said softly, her words carrying clearly in the hushed room. "She makes the best hot chocolate when I'm sad. She never yells or gets angry, even when I spill things. She just